The Fortus. This video covers the Fortus from the number 5 lead solo perspective. The Fortus is a challenging, aerobatic, slow-speed maneuver featuring both solo pilots line abreast in the full carrier landing configuration, but with a twist. Number 5, the lead solo, flies the maneuver inverted. The Fortus is the first airborne section maneuver, and therefore requires both pilots to make the mental shift to flying in formation as a section, focusing on smoothness, precision, and accuracy, representing not just the capabilities of the F-18C Hornet, but also the singular unity and excellence present in every naval aviator. Briefing. The Fortus is a challenging, inverted maneuver that is sometimes referred to as the mirror image pass. The Fortus begins with a 10-degree climb and a gentle left turn to the behind-the-crowd heading. While number 6 is focused on nailing the line abreast angle to sweeten the hit, number 5 is focused on flying the most stable and predictable profile possible. The maneuver begins once 6 rejoins in a tight parade formation on 5's right wing. While behind the crowd, number 5 should focus on a consistent altitude and predictable decrease in airspeed to allow 6 to rejoin safely. From there, the 2 aircraft will turn towards the show line and dirty up, dropping their landing gear and a resting hook to enter full carrier landing configuration. While the gear deploy, an increase in power will be needed to maintain relative airspeed. The Fortus requires a good understanding of formation flying, and requires number 5 to fly a steady, predictable profile. Throughout the maneuver, number 5 will need to maintain a section lead mentality as they guide both pilots on to show line. At 2 nautical miles from center point, number 5 will roll inverted, and number 6 will move up his left side to line abreast formation, slightly below number 5, so that the 2 jets appear to the crowd to be mirror images of each other. Crossing center point, number 5 will roll back 180 degrees upright, and both aircraft will perform a gentle clearing turn behind the crowd while retracting their gear and hook in unison. Once gear and hook are up on both aircraft, they will clear 90 degrees on separate headings in preparation for the minimum radius turn. Walkthrough. Welcome back to the cockpit of the F-18C Hornet. We are now facing behind the crowd, just having completed the inverted to inverted rolls 90-degree clear to the behind the crowd heading. We're at about a 10-degree climb behind the crowd to clear a little bit of altitude, a little bit of room for the diamond to tuck in underneath us. Shortly, we're going to be beginning our left-hand turn to set up behind the crowd for the Fortus. Now at this point, we are shifting our philosophy of flight from an individual pilot, especially one that is following 6's calls on the inbound, to a flight lead. And this requires a significant change in how we think about flying the jet, how we actually fly the jet, and how we communicate about flying the jet. And it requires some phraseology that's going to become very vital. So I'm going to go over that now, starting with the stick. If you intend to bank left or right, you say, come and left, or come and right. What this indicates to your wingman is that you're beginning a bank left or right. Now, if you want to bank harder, or especially if you want to bank beyond 45 degrees, you say, come in further left, or come in further right. These two calls indicate to your wingman that you are going beyond 45 degrees and that they should adjust their flight parameters, such as rudder inputs, accordingly. Additionally, if you want to pull the stick back towards you and begin a climb, you say, a little pull, or a little pull. Now, the first example, a little pull, means just a tiny bit of pull, just a little tiny increase in the pull. But because a lot of maneuvers require a lot of pull, you would say a little pull. And during that tone, during the sing-songy tone that you hear Boss give in the Blue Angels, the duration of that tone indicates how long you are pulling the stick back for. And the pitch and intensity of Boss's tone indicate the aggressiveness of that pull. So long is Boss's calling a little pull. That is how long the stick is going back for. When he stops singing, that's when you stop pulling the stick back. Now, when you want to release that pull, you say ease in the pull, which indicates to 6 that you are easing that pull out. And the speed of that call and the intensity of that call, just like the sing-songiness of the pull call, indicates to your wingman how quickly or how slowly that maneuver is going. So for a quick easing the pull, you would say ease of the pull. For a slow ease of the pull, you'd say ease in the pull, which indicates a very slow ease of the pull. Now, oftentimes when we're in a bank and we're easing the pull, we would say ease in the pull and roll it out. This indicates that we're easing the stick back to neutral and we're rolling the stick back to neutral to match level flight. Now, additionally, there are rare cases where you're going to need to push the stick forward. This is really not recommended if you can at all avoid it, but there are some times when that's needed, and that call is a little drive. Now, that call a little drive references the fact that the Blue Angels fly with a spring, and they don't actually push the stick forward. They're just releasing the stick to go a little bit forward towards the bulkhead. And that release of the stick actually releases the flight surfaces and flattens them out a little bit, which reduces drag, which also puts the nose down a tiny bit and increases speed. So a little drive is given because of that distinction, but also because a little pull and a little push sound too similar at the beginning. A little pull, a little push sound very similar. And it actually is confusing as a wingman for someone to say a little push because it sounds a lot like pull is coming, and you really do have to think ahead of your lead when you're flying in such close formation like the Blue Angels do. So instead of saying a little push when we move the stick forward, we say a little drive. Now let's move on to the throttle. If you want to increase speed, you say adding power. You can even say adding more power. Adding power means I'm beginning to add power forward. Adding more power means we're going to keep adding power, so you better keep up. And this can be a call that lasts a while as well if you're adding a bit of power. You can say adding power, adding more power, to indicate that the throttle is moving forward the whole time in a slow and steady motion that your wingman can follow. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of these calls are distinct in their phraseology so that they're not confused between one or the other. But there's one call that is not distinct, and that is easing power. Now, it's easing power and easing pull, so those two can easily get confused, but most maneuvers don't require both at the same time. So easing power, easing more power, you'll hear Boss give when he's, for example, doing the half squirrel cage. Easing power is something that we use here in the Fortus as we're starting to roll out because we're trying to go from 380, 370 knots down to about 315 before we roll in for the maneuver. So that's why you will hear the easing power call. So now that we've gone over the phraseology of how to fly like a lead, let's put that into practice as we come left and ease our power back to 315. So, I'm going to mimic the calls that would be made in the jet as if I were flying it. So, coming left for the Fortus. Hook's coming down. 355. 345. Easing some pull. 340. Easing more power. 335. 330. Easing the pull. And roll it out. 325. Now at this stage, we've rolled out behind the crowd. And actually, I believe we're a little far. The target distance, rolling out behind the crowd, is 2 miles. Now, 2 miles directly behind center point. Notice how we are actually at a bit of an angle. This angle, plus the 0.3 we see here, means that we're actually probably a little shallow. We're probably at about 1.8, 1.9 miles perpendicular to the center line. And at this point, that means that we're in a pretty good position to roll out on 244, the crowd right heading. At this stage, we're continuing to ease the power, and we're continuing to wait to hear 6 call, "You got 2, Chariot." To which our response would be, "Chariot," thus indicating that we have heard his call, and we know that he's formed up with us. Now, we continue to call our speeds until we hear his call. Now, when he says, "You got 2," that means he's formed up with us and following us close enough that he can match our speed without us having to call it. As soon as he calls, "You got 2," at this point, we call out the maneuver again. Solos are behind the crowd setting up the Fortus. At which point, Brother Leb would respond, or your fellow pilot would respond with their call sign, which would be Leb. This is similar to 2 or 2, 3, which you hear in Air Force and aviation squadrons when a flight lead is providing a call. Let's really quick check on where Brother Leb is at this point. Brother Leb is over there. He's in a pretty good position, and he's probably not going to call, "You got 2." He's probably going to call, "You'll have 2, Chariot." And that means I'm not in position, but I will be by the time we do this maneuver. That call indicates that you don't have anything to worry about, but he's not quite in, so don't expect him to be in position for the maneuver quite yet. We've hopped back on board, and now it's time to talk about when we're going to turn in for the Fortus. At the moment, we are at 1,000 feet at 322 knots. 1,000 feet is pretty good. 322 knots is a little fast. We need to back that down to about 315 before our roll-in. What we are looking for before our roll-in for the Fortus specifically is 3.3 miles. We want to arc a turn at about 3.8 to 4 miles so that we end up on center line, on profile, at about 2.5 miles. Gear down, hook down, at about 300 knots. That is our target profile to roll out on center point. So we're going to continue straight and level, easing back our power continuously to try and hit 315 and wait for 3.3 miles away from the crowd. So let's unpause. You'll have 2, Chariot. Chariot. Adding a little power. Souls are behind the crowd setting up the Fortus. Left. Coming left. Come in for the left and the pull. Stand by the gear. Gear. Alright, so the call that just came was the stand by the gear call. This call is cadenced so that 6 can match our gear drop exactly. So the cadence is stand by the gear. So if you're a musician, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 for the beats in the measure. So it would be 1, 6, 4 measure of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that allows Brother Leb to match exactly when we're going to put our gear down so that both of our gears drop down in unison. So at this point, we've made that call, and the gear will start coming down with 6 in formation with us. But we don't have time to watch that because we have to pay attention to our speed. This speed is going to drop significantly as the gear drops out of the jet and begins to create drag. This means we have to add a lot of power to ensure that we continue flying at 300 knots. This is the easiest part to miss when you're task saturated in your first couple times of doing the Fortus, so make sure to pay close attention to your speed as you're coming around this corner. Try to lock in at 300 knots before you take your shoulder check to start lining up for center line. So let's unpause here. We've just dropped the gear, and now we're going to add power to try and hold around 300 to 290 knots. It's also important to note that our target altitude as we roll out on show line is going to be 500 feet. So we need to work our way down towards that altitude as we progress through the turn. Adding power. Adding more power. Power set. At this point, we look out. And now we're trying to sweeten the deal. Ease in the pull. Ease in more pull. Rolling out a little bank. That's what I didn't talk about. Rolling out a little bank means we're coming in a little too sharp. And so we need to roll out some bank. We need to roll the jet out of the turn a little bit to widen the turn to make sure that we reach center line. This is often accompanied with ease in the pull, roll and out a little bank, because those two things need to come in concert, because if you roll out bank and don't ease the pull, the jet will climb. So as we're looking at center point, we need to be trying to make sure that our jets are going to roll out on center point. Ease and some more pull. Rolling out a little bank. Ease in the pull. And rolling out. The Fortus. At this point, we're looking to roll out our jets on center line. And let me adjust the camera here. Looks like we're going to be a little close to the crowd. Center line would be about here. And we're going to miss it by about 50 feet. That's okay. We can aim at center point as we roll out for the maneuver. Now at this point, we're looking for this distance here of 2 miles. At 2 miles, we're going to be pulling inverted, and that's when things start to get complicated. So let's walk you right up to it, and then we'll explain it. Chariots rolling in, clear. So, chariots rolling in means I'm on profile, and I'm ready to roll in. Brother Leb says clear because he's telling us that he's far enough away that we can do an aerobatic maneuver without hitting his jet. So at this stage, this is when the Fortus really begins. We're going to do a pretty hefty yug, followed by a release of the stick forward and a roll to the left. As we're rolling left, just as we did for the inverted to inverted, we're going to need a pretty significant shove of the stick or a little bit of drive in the roll to ensure that we line up on center line. At that point, it's a lot of drive, just as we did for the inverted to inverted, to keep the jet on horizon. And as we do this roll, it's extremely vital when we roll out to pay attention to this up here. This is our vertical speed indicator. This vertical speed indicator will tell us whether or not we are climbing or whether or not we are descending. And we want that to be pegged on 0 as best we can. So, let's get ourselves rolled in and let's see how we do. Now look at that. A pretty good roll in. As you can see, pretty well lined up with center point. We're about on altitude. We're dropping a little bit, but we should be able to recover that with a little bit of push. Now at this point, this is when we make the call to number 6 to tell 6 what our profile is, because he's staring at our jet, he's not looking at where we're going. Additionally, with the aerobatic move that we just pulled, it's hard for him to tell, relative to our previous flight path, how our jet is behaving. And so it's our responsibility to tell him. What I would say is online, and if you listen to the real Blue Angels comms, they would also say online on altitude. This means that I'm headed straight towards center point, and I'm at the contract altitude that we specified. So my call to Brother Leb here would be online a little low. That tells him that I'm headed straight towards center point and looking like I'm descending a bit. So that tells him how to adjust his sight picture in order to create the best hit. At this point, it's our job to keep the plane as stable as possible, to make as few adjustments as possible. We don't want to touch our speed. We don't want to touch our altitude. We don't want to touch our angle of bank. We want to fly as straight and level as possible, watching our vertical speed indicator to make sure that we are not climbing or descending. So let's see how we do. We descended quite a bit, so we're pushing up. We're going to ease that push and level it out, and now we're aiming to zero out that vertical speed indicator. Now, it's also worth noting, I'm going to zoom out a little bit because we got something that we have to pay attention to. I'm going to pause it right here. As we're approaching center point, we're trying to fly straight and level. We're trying to watch this vertical speed indicator. Out of the corner of my eye, I'm watching this little bug right here. This bug right here points towards our waypoint, which we currently have set as our center point. When this whips around behind us, that means that we've hit center point. As soon as we've hit center point, I call center point. That tells Brother Leb to begin the next phase of the maneuver, which is the clear. As soon as we hit center point, we give it a 2 count, and then we say a little pull. Now, why do we say pull? Well, we're definitely not going to pull into the ground, but because we are the flight lead, we are giving the instruction to our wingman, in this case number 6, of what he's supposed to do. So as the flight lead, we're selfless in this particular scenario, and we are giving the indication to 6 of what he's supposed to do. When we say a little pull, we start pushing the stick forward or giving it drive to try and pull up to 10 degrees by about half a mile away from center point. So, in summary, when we hit center point and this bug flips around, at that point we call center point, we give it a 2 count, and then we say a little pull up until we hit about 7 degrees. Then we say, Cherry's rolling out. At that point, Brother Leb will call clear, if he's clear, telling us that we can do our aerobatic maneuver to level out, at which point we'll be at about 10 degrees nose high, which should equate to rolling out about nose level. Let's see whether or not we pull that off. Center point. A little pull. Cherry's rolling out. Clear. Coming left. Set. So a lot of things just happened there. We rolled out. Brother Leb called clear. I called clear. Then I said coming left, and that means we move to a 35-degree leftward bank, at which point we call set. Now this set is necessary in DCS because we have lag. But in real life, it's a contract bank angle, and so coming left, and they would just maneuver left and hit that angle, and they wouldn't have to call the set. But as soon as we call set, we still have work to do. We have to get the gear and flaps up before we break 300 knots. So the call is stand by the gear, gear, hook. And that indicates gear up and then hook up. And the reason for the break is because it takes the hook a shorter amount of time to get back up into the jet than the gear. And we are timing our calls so that both of them appear to fold into the jet at the same time to the crowd. And we're making those calls cadenced so that number 6 can also match our hook and gear rates so that we look like a perfect mirror image of each other as we fly away. So, stand by the gear, gear, hook. And now we try and fly at 35-degree bank, as level as possible, until we hit about 40 degrees, or we're shooting for the clear to happen at 40 degrees. So we will say then number 6's call sign and knock it off, meaning we're done with the maneuver. So as we're approaching that 40-degree mark, it would be Brother Leb, knock it off. And that tells Bredeleb that it's time for him to clear. When we call knock it off, we roll level, punch it into burners, and then pull up 5 degrees and clear behind the crowd to crowd left, trying to hit 400 knots in preparation for the MRT. So let's see how we do. Bredeleb, knock it off. Leb's clear. Cherry's clear. And clear behind the crowd for the MRT. State. 8-9er. So we rolled out behind the crowd, we pulled right to the crowd left heading, and we called the next maneuver and our state in preparation for the MRT. Now that you've learned the details of the Fortus, let's put it all together by watching a section of our live show from Kobuleti a couple of months ago. While not every show is perfect, we think this is a pretty representative pass.
3, 3, 4. Left. Stand by, roll. Chariot's clear, and clear behind the crowd for the horse. Coming left, hooks coming down, state 9-4.
Leb, state 9-3.
360. 350. 345. 340.
You got 2.
330, chariot, ease in the pull and rolling out. 320, state 9-4.
Little overshoot.
Adding a little power.
Leb's in.
Chariot.
State is 9-2.
Coming left. Coming further left, and the pull. Stand by the gear. Adding power. Adding more power. Power set. Ease and some pull, ease and some power. Ease and more pull. Adding a little power. Coming left. And rolling out. The Fortus, a little outboard. Up. Chariot's rolling in.
Clear.
Chariot's online. Center point. A little pull. Chariot's rolling out.
Clear.
Coming left. Set. Stand by the gear. Hook. Bredeleb, knock it off.
Clear.
Chariot's clear. And Cherry's clearing behind the crowd for the MRT, state 9-0.
MRT, state 8-8.
And that's how the Legacy Blue Solos performed the Fortus. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel where you can find full side-by-side show sequences and debriefs. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the flight line.